Hi, and thanks again for joining me on this special edition of Who Are Environmental Health Officers to celebrate World Environmental Health Day 2020. Today, I'll be speaking not only to environmental health officers, but those who work alongside them. How would you describe environmental health?
It's a good question because I think we spend our whole life explaining what environmental health is to people, because my own personal opinion is that it's a very poor title for our profession. I think we should be called public health officers. So I describe environmental health as the link between the environment and health.
Environmental health is an interesting title, isn't it? Because when you think of it, people automatically think that it's about the environment, and I suppose it is, but it's about the environment of a human.
Environmental health is the varied practice of ensuring that any risk to public health from varied sources is as limited as possible.
To me, environmental health is everything in the environment that could impact on the health of an individual or a community or a business, or there's something in the air, the noise, the food, the soil that can impact on somebody's health.
Environmental health is dealing with, your home, your hairdresser, the spaces that you inhabit. So your environment rather than the natural environment.
And as environmental health officers, we are looking at means of preventing disease or illnesses based on the environment around us.
And how long have you been an environmental health officer?
I've been out in the EH world, largely in local government, for 20 years.
I've been basically in local government for 30 plus years and an EHO for the same amount of time.
I've been an environmental health officer for over 20 years.
I started off in the mid-70s when I qualified, working for the State Health Department in Melbourne.
I've been an EHO now for 8 months, just going on 8 months, so still very new. I started on the 20th of January this year.
At the end of my bachelor degree, so end of last year.
Where are you working and what's your role?
My role is Environmental Health and Partnerships Manager at Curnow. I've only actually joined Curnow, it's only been just over 2 years.
I've worked in local government for a few years and then started working for Curnow about 18 years ago.
I work for an organisation called the Eastern Health Authority.
There was an opportunity that came up to work with Curnow, and I just took that on just because it was like just get a bit more like suburban experience at Brimbank where I am currently.
I started as a mature age graduate at Curtin University with 3 small children running around the campus.
So I had about total of about 35 years in local government. But in 2007, I left local government and worked virtually full time with Australia Red Cross doing their international water and sanitation projects, and retired from that in 2012. But I'm still on the database to be deployed internationally. I call myself the last resort if they get absolutely desperate.
We're a suburban council. We have a portion of our area is on the plains, a portion of it is in the hills.
How has COVID-19 affected your role?
So as a mayor, I had a calendar that was full of events, kissing babies, cutting ribbons, all those types of things. And suddenly that emptied out and there was this big thing on the horizon that we knew nothing about. People were looking towards government for advice. And so the advice was coming from the Chief Medical Officer and from the Commissioner of Police. And we were hearing about it, but it was actually on the ground. It was the EHOs that were probably out there explaining what was going on better than the rest of us.
For me, my role didn't go on hold, but we certainly, in those early days, it was all hands on deck as an exec team to think about how we keep the business going, how we keep supporting our clients, how we which is supporting our clients really means making sure our health professionals and our services continue to be delivered in the community for the councils and make sure it's done safely.
So yeah, my role as the operations manager, probably it's changed significantly. My focus has certainly changed. Now it's more so, okay, how can we keep afloat? How can we keep everybody safe? How can we kind of get through this, get out the other side with our staff being intact, our clients being comfortable with what we've done, and our communities as safe as possible?
It's affected my position and my work quite significantly. I was called up to assist at the State Emergency Centre in the public health sector. So I'm in what's called FEOC, which is Public Health Emergency Operations Centre, and I specialise in communicating with local governments. So giving local governments advice on changes in directions. I also can advocate for environmental health and local government generally as partners that can assist in responses to COVID-19 in the regional areas.
Well, I think being like an EHT, 50% of your workload's probably in the field, 50% in the office. So all that office-based work is now done at home. We just use like a VPN. So it's the same as being basically at the office, just using your personal computer or a computer that council's provided you.
Yeah.
And instead of having like our weekly like team meetings, it's all done over Teams or Zoom. But yeah, in terms of inspections though, it's pretty routine work. It's fairly similar. However, we are now calling up prior to going out to any business. Usually we do unannounced visits. So we're just trying to do as much of the audit remotely. And then once we're in there, trying to get in and out as quickly as possible.
Certainly, for a time we were split over 2 sites, so half of the EHOs, but also half of the immunisation staff and admin staff moved to a different site. So for business continuity, if it was the case that someone felt ill, we would have continuity of service. But basically, there's nobody that I can think of on the team that was unaffected by the pandemic. Everybody's role changed a bit.
What was your work environment like at the beginning of the COVID-19 response?
When I came in, everything was at quite a peak. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the response was a matter of people being drawn in and sat at a seat, really good people, but working in different environments. And everybody coped and just went with the flow.
When the pandemic was sort of still in its very early stages and the fear was at its most heightened, so the end of March and throughout April, we modified our food inspection style just to encompass the really high risk areas for COVID and also for food safety.
Our EHOs were really proactive. So they were giving out information about how to stay safe, definitely in particular to food businesses. But the food businesses were really unsure, and so they were also acting in a counselling way. So they were counselling food businesses. They were like a friendly face in times of uncertainty. And so as the pandemic unrolled and the mandated closures or restrictions, as environmental health officers walked into the businesses would be going, oh, thank God you're here.
We needed to have an agile mindset in terms of how we thought about what's coming, that we need to think it was going to be fluid.
As soon as we learned about coronavirus, we actually, as a company, looked at what that meant for us. We started off with what we called our environmental health response and action plan and our immunisation response and action plan. And then all of a sudden it was announced about COVID safe plans, and businesses had to have COVID safe plans. And the first thing we thought was, well, that's what we have. Like, this is exactly what we already have. I would say that our COVID safe plan started from that day one. I think I'm up to version 17 or something like that. So it literally is just version updated every time there's a change.
What are your thoughts on Australia's COVID response?
I would love to speak to the people who make decisions, say, well, have you actually gone back to what happened with the Ebola and learned some of the lessons that were learned over there and use that lessons in the COVID-19 response? And I don't know what the answer would be. Having the right PPE is really important. putting it on correctly is extremely important, but taking it off correctly is absolutely critical. And I have seen on TV some medical people, and not only here in Australia, but overseas, where they have followed a doctor through a COVID ward, and the doctor's walked out of the red zone and said, oh, thank God for that, I'm outside. And they've taken their PPE off, ripped their hat off, ripped their mask off, and the first thing they've done is said, oh God, thank God to be out of there, it's so hot in there. Wipe their faces all with their hands that have been taken off their contaminated PPE. And I'm sitting at home thinking, how in the hell, no wonder these people are getting COVID-19. This use of thermometers. Everyone sticks a thermometer in your head and say, oh, you're all right, you're 36.5, you're all right, you're 36.5, you're all right. There is absolutely no control over the calibration or the accuracy of thermometers. When we worked in Ebola, we did a bit of work on the accuracy of thermometers because we were checking everyone's temperature, and we would have the same person with 5 different thermometers get 5 different readings. I've got my mother in an aged care facility. I go in and I check my temperature, and sometimes they write it down as 33. Well, if it's 33, I should be dead.
I think as WA has come to a position where we are in a state where we can just rest a little bit. Everything's being reassessed, and so we know exactly what we need. We know the people that we need, and people are being called back to their substantive roles because there's still a need for public health, business as usual.
When COVID came along, I guess we all were required to shift our thinking about where we put our efforts, and some of those things that we would normally be doing in our roles change because we need to have thought about how we're going to respond as an organisation. Because Sam, I suppose just to highlight, in Victoria we've been through 2 lockdowns really.
We recognise in environmental health and immunisation that the last thing anybody wants right now is an outbreak of a vaccine preventable disease. But to me, this has been an opportunity to actually say, well, we are an essential service. We still need to do this work because if we don't, it's actually going to have big implications for these communities.
So because this came across us so quickly, I think the community were in shock. We as a business and an administration were also scrambling to get on top of what we had to do. And there was a lot of information out there that we were in charge of disseminating, but also implementing.
How have you managed the stress and change to your lifestyle?
I'll start by saying I've got a great team and we laugh a lot. And that's really useful, I think, to be able to laugh. And we're all very supportive of one another. Kind of trying to keep my routines as much in place as possible. So I ride my bicycle to work. I continue to do that. It's a very healthy and COVID-safe way to get to work. And lots of coffee. Those would be the ways, I think, that I manage my stress.
The days are long, they're intense, and it's important for everybody working in this area to be able to escape and just switch off and reset everything so that you can come back and be on your best to carry on the next week.
And as a company, we're very mindful to look after our staff's well-being and welfare and all those things as well anytime. So we were mindful of that as well at the beginning. So it's not every day asking, how are you? Are you okay? Is everything all right? Do you need anything? But just providing that sense of support in general and having some structured things in place. So some sort of regular check-ins and welfare checks and things like that with our team leaders.
Yeah, I'm probably not the right person to ask because I don't seem to suffer much stress, even though I've worked in some stressful environments over the years. People have often said to me, how can you work in a place like Rwanda where 800,000 people died in 100 days and you were in the middle of that for 3 months, et cetera, and then come home and go back to work? Well, I've always had the absolute strength of my family, my wife, who supports me, 3 children, and a lot of normality. I come back, and the day after I get back to Australia, I'm mowing the nature strip and kicking the football in the backyard with my son. So that the importance of having family and friends around you who you can talk to and relate things to. And I know with the COVID lockdown, that becomes really complicated. But so people need to have people they can at least speak to at least speak to on the phone. But having said that, that's not going to work for everybody. I think people have to try and not be considering at this stage what they're going to be doing for Christmas. It's too far away. I think you've got to take a day at a time, just be patient about things will improve, things will come good, but it's going to take time, and don't be sort of too impatient about that, because that's when people get anxious saying, oh, you know, Christmas is coming up and I don't think I'm going to be able to see you. I think in addition to that, the other thing is to have some other interest, whether it be watching programs on TV, reading a book, etc. What I've actually done in my COVID, and hopefully one day you'll get to see it, I've written a book on my experience as an EHO.
What would you say to the EHOs working on the forefront?
Thank you. You're doing a marvellous job. We're out in the community and speaking to people from all different backgrounds. You have no idea of the exposure risk, and there is inherent risk in that, but they do it because they know that it's public health and safety. So a big thank you, and keep up the good work.
It's critical. You continue to work hard out there. Hopefully it won't be long and we'll be through the roughest part of it.
They are absolutely committed, and it is amazing that because they are so much part of what's going on, and yet the unsung heroes, you know, without taking away in any way away from the frontline medicos, they're dealing with the results of the pandemic, while EHOs are in the background crazily trying to stop the disease spreading. So their job is as important as the frontline workers, and yet we don't hear about them. So I'd say to them, you are so important. You're the ones that are stopping us contracting this virus. Your work is really important, and even if you don't hear that you're appreciated, you are.
The people and the passion, the knowledge and skills of the people in this area is outstanding. And you know, whilst it's a pandemic's not the best place to be working, you know, they're so clever in here. It's just such a privilege to be here, albeit it's under unpleasant circumstances.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Environmental health officers are very much part of an emergency response. We tend to think of them as just being legislative, but they are part of the planning process and part of keeping us safe going forward.
The response and the effectiveness of controlling Ebola is a public health response. It is not a medical response. It's a public health response. It's about surveillance. It's about contract tracing. It's about education. It's about doing all these things. There's no treatment for Ebola. Once you got into Ebola treatment centre, the only treatment was good food, plenty of drink, occasionally intravenous drips, but that was a bit complicated. So it's not a medical response. It was looking after people. It's a public health response. And I think COVID's a bit like that. I think it's a public health response, not a medical response. That's where it will be won and lost will be what happens in the community, not what happens in a hospital.
Environmental health officers have a critical role to play in disease and pandemic response. This Environmental Health Day, show your respect and support for these hidden heroes by commenting below or sharing this video with your friends. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this special edition of Environmental Health Australia's Who Are Environmental Health Officers video series. I'll see you next time.